What would you say if I told you that I have a split personality? It's true, in a manner of speaking. As I think back to my childhood, I see a girl with two distinct sides of herself. There was a serious academic girl who didn't want to make waves and was quiet in the classroom. And then there was a twirly whirly artistic girl that wanted to dance and sing to her heart's delight. And so this girl, when she was in school, wanted the highest scores on the tests and the best grades. But after school, she wanted to take piano lessons, choir lessons, and voice lessons. In school, this girl ended up in the spelling bee several years in a row. But after school, she would end up in the school musicals, being pretty goofy with all those artsy kids. And so, as I continued down my journey of figuring out who I was as a youth, I continued to play out these two sides of myself. There was the serious academic girl that went into the International Baccalaureate program in high school. And then there was the girl who excelled in all of the music and theater. And even I felt at home in both of those places. In that IB program with all of the so-called dorks, and with all the choir kids singing to Rent. But as I realized that college is really where you're supposed to decide what you want to be when you grow up, I felt a pull suddenly to pick a lane, which was new to me because I had always spent my life happily pursuing these parallel paths, the academic side and the more artsy side. And in college, I found that impossible because there was this practical side of me that really wanted to excel and compete with the others around me. But that artistic side that had spent years and years of practice, and I didn't want all that practice to go in vain. And so I had an ultimately painful journey figuring out what the heck I should do. And I felt more and more pulled to that more serious side of myself. And I took a somewhat meandering path to a JD MBA program and ended up in a pretty successful career as an in-house lawyer at one of the most well-known companies in the world. But still, I often still sometimes wonder if I deviated too far from that little girl who wanted nothing more than to just twirl around in a purple dress wearing ballet shoes. And it's really only been recently where I've been able to think about the more obvious connections in that journey, and that how I really didn't always need to think about my artistic endeavors being separate from my career pursuits. Now, if I was a scientist, I would use this talk to tell you about how music and arts affect the brain and how synapses are drawn and how really those things enhance your brain and really make your brain prepared for anything. But I'm a lawyer, and lawyers help make connections between facts and reasoning and help people come to a conclusion. So what I'll do today is help you make some of those connections, and maybe in your own world, you can think of your artistic pursuits a little differently. Here's where my connections are. Excelling at music as a child, I had to compulsively plunk and replunk at the piano, taking a turn of phrase and trying it over and over again, and also infusing my musicality into it. But ultimately, it was a quite solitary, repetitive activity, but one that I enjoyed. So too is it with lawyers who have to spend many a compulsive night learning to read through texts at a cheetah's pace, consuming hundreds of pages of information for the next day's class. Or take dance. Dance is often thought of as an exceedingly girly pastime. But anyone who's watched Black Swan should know that underneath those pink ballet shoes is a competitive, fierce soul that wants nothing more than succeeding. If that is not a lawyer, I do not know what is. Or take acting. Perhaps it's a little bit more obvious with acting that there are certain things you learn in acting that carry throughout any career. For example, you learn to project your voice, you learn certain posture, and you learn to hold a presence in the room. In fact, what I'm doing right now arguably is just an extension of how I learned to be a good actress at one point or another. I couldn't really do a talk like this without that artistic experience. And so when you think about it, connections between the arts and the working world are pretty obvious. As I built this artistic muscle, I was building a number of qualities that translate into any career. During my artistic journey, I learned to deal with major rejections, going from audition to audition and never really understanding why I didn't get a certain part or didn't get into a certain program. I also learned how to hone my endurance by pursuing multiple performances in a weekend, many of them 2 hours at a time, and many times 2 performances in a day. If work projects and even the act of finishing law school in itself is an endurance sport, I don't know what is. And then I also learned how to be flexible, navigating the ins and outs of what I felt like was a complicated piece of music that needed just a certain amount of thing, but then having to switch to a different type of music with a totally different feel and a totally different style. The flexibility of an in-house counsel is undeniable. You come in thinking you're going to be working on one thing, but you really never know what you're going to be working on. And then the dedication that's involved in pursuing all of these things, even when you feel like quitting, just because you love what you do. I'm sure that resonates with just about any career person that I know. So, if it's that apparent that you can draw so many connections in retrospect, why are we still treating arts as an extra thing that you do after school? Why are arts the ones that are facing the severest budget cuts in school? And why is a career in STEM suddenly the be all and end all? Why is there a single path to academic and career success? I don't know about you, but the best leaders I know are the creative ones. The best salespeople I know are the creative ones. The best engineers I know are the creative ones. So if we think about STEAM the way some schools are doing, they talk about science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, maybe they're starting to get that a well-rounded person is an artistic person. And perhaps as a youth, if I would have had just one teacher help me make those connections myself, I would have not had such an ultimately painful journey trying to figure out how to manage this split personality between my serious side and my more playful artistic side. For example, if some professor had simply encouraged me to do a performative piece instead of give an oral argument on a paper involving note cards, maybe that would have helped. Or maybe I should have been encouraged to join the debate team. Maybe I should have been encouraged to join some mock trial team. Or maybe I was actually encouraged to do these things, but the connection between the arts and what could really, really be a successful long-term career was not obvious enough to me. That's also true. Because really, any career requires creativity. I mean, just the other day, I was complimented for providing a very, very complex set of requirements in a very simple manner. If you don't think that requires creativity, explaining it to a marketing person, let me tell you, it does. Or even giving a presentation of this nature. I had to take all sorts of things out of nowhere and create something. Certainly not an activity I take lightly, but I couldn't have done it without all of the steps in my journey that got me here. And the creative pieces that I bring to my writing, making a very persuasive legal argument, making a complicated project really makes sense to someone who doesn't really want to work on a legal project. All of these things require an immense amount of creativity. And it's funny, I always hear that sports builds character. But what about all those kids that just never felt at home playing sports? These are the kids that grew up eating lunch in the classroom or in the choir room. These are the kids that were singing Rent in the hallways. These are the kids that are often called misfits, odd, artsy fartsy, not going anywhere. I really can't think of a better way to build character in oneself, except for the arts, if you think about it. I mean, think about all those things I talked about before. The rejection, their endurance, the flexibility, and the dedication to one's craft. If those are not complete character building components that any career needs, I don't know what is. So how can we help these kids channel that rejection, channel that endurance, channel that flexibility, and channel that dedication into something that's perhaps a more practical career? Because let's face it, most of us, no matter how much we want to be Julie Andrews, the next Julie Andrews, most of us won't get there. But there are still things that we can take from those experiences and use anywhere. Let's help the kids get there more quickly. I found that every kid, in fact, is pretty much learning to get a real job. But it doesn't have to be an ultimately painful pursuit the way it was painful for me, in terms of feeling like all of this artistic skill was wasted. And finally, let's try to pivot the narrative away from helping kids assume that you should just be one thing in life. For example, this question, what do you want to be when you grow up? While it's well-meaning, it's misguided. This assumes that you should just be one thing when you grow up. And how silly is that? No one's just one thing. So maybe they're not going to be the next Julie Andrews. But does that mean that there are skills that Julie Andrews hopeful can't use elsewhere? No, it does not. So maybe we should pivot the question away from what do you want to be when you grow up toward what do you most like doing? What skills are you doing? What skills are you using while you're doing it? And how can I help you use those skills in any pursuit? I'm telling you, if you pivot the questions that way, those kids who have these dashed dreams of artistic days that are perhaps numbered, they may be able to think more clearly and draw connections more quickly. So I challenge you. If you have a kid that feels like they're living with a split personality, doing one thing in school and one thing after school, or even you yourself, if you've never reconciled your own split personality, let's tweak that thinking a little bit. Because in fact, it is my own split personality, which is really not split at all, that has helped me seemingly seamlessly transition between the number of roles that I play throughout my life. Lawyer, mom, wife, community member, musician, dog owner, and dancer. We don't have to just be one thing. We can bring our whole selves to work. That's what we all say, right? And that should include helping people understand that the arts is just one milestone on a successful career journey.